Hey, it's Pavel. As for the current state of the project, we have up and running basic controller. And as for the purpose of this video, I have extended it to call some not yet existent service. What happened for the controller part is just calls and obtaining the parameters from the request, which is ID from path parameters and data from a body part of request JSON. And what will happen today is to implement a service layer and data access storage provider. For these purposes, I have already prepared an interface of a provider, what we will use in our system. So we have a handling of the calls that we already use in our controller, and obtaining of an instance of this provider as for a singleton, similar to what we have prepared for the server instance. Also, I have already prepared a model, which is the listing of types of providers that we support for now. And as for now, it's just in memory, not production ready storage. I have also prepared a resource type, which will hold the data in a given data storage. So we have a basic file metadata with some ID, some dates to it, and wrapper on a pagination, which is just a page number, page size, and the total amount of elements. So let's get to the implementation part, and we will start with a service layer. So here it will be just a basic mapper, which will take the response from our storage provider and translate it into something that our controller and further HTTP response would understand. So we need to get the provider instance and call on it the not yet implemented get all items function. And if we don't get an error, then we will return if we get an error, we will return a 500 response, and in the positive case, we will answer with 200 get your data. It's JSON, no JSON type. It should be a JSON array of all the resources for given page of the answer. Quite similar will be handling of get an item by ID, so I will just copy the schema, and here we will just call get by ID. And one single difference for this entry will be that if there is no item found in the storage, we will answer with 404, and in the other cases, indeed, it will be 500. And in case of we do find some data, it's the same as it was for that all. And again, quite the same it works for that content. Besides of we call obviously a different function, and we answer with object stream. And also in case of we obtain an empty file, we will return another error that we don't want to process this file, or really it's error, it's no content. So either we have an malformed or empty file in our database. And if it's fine, then we just return that to 200. You got what you requested. Okay, so let's get to one more very similar use case to that is deletion of the entry, as it's also very simple, and it's just that with a different answer, as we want to return the amount of rows that were deleted in our request, which should be either 0 or 1. And what is left here is object creation and updating. So let's get to that. For create, we need to pass some JSON as input, and if it fails to parse by our schema, then we want to throw it as a batch request error. We can't really do anything more with that. It doesn't match what we expected. Okay, here is the point that some validation should happen. It's not the scope of this piece of implementation. We will get to it later. So for now, let's try to create the resource, save it to our data structure. If it fails, we do throw some error response. If there is no such error, but we don't have ID as the response from provider, then if we do have an ID obtained, then we know that we managed to create our resource, so we can return it as well. And in case of actual error, so any case that is not mentioned above, I have a typo, it should be unmarshal, not marshal. And if there is some other error, we will just return 500 and format it as error string of cannot create the resource. And quite the same stuff with update. It's basically the same handling, except that we need to pass ID as well to know which resource we are trying to update. We call that let's update it, and if it returns some error, then we will return 500, and it is fine. We throw 200 with a parsed number of rows that was updated in this request. That's how it should look for now. As mentioned, it could be extended with some validators or calls to different services if that's required. For now, for our case, that is enough. So let's get to the implementation of in-memory storage provider. To get started with that, we need a few items, like the data structures in which we will keep our entries. So we need to make empty structures for resources, and for the content it will be slice for the first one, and some map for the latter. The map will hold the string as ID of the resource, and the byte array as the content of the file that we put in. And we need some structure type that will implement the interface we have prepared for it. Plus two more things before we get to implementation. We will need functions that will help us to find and remove the item from the these data structures. So let's try to implement that, and it will make the further implementation faster. For that item by ID, we will need to return its ID and its and the exact resource or nil if it's not found. To handle that, we will sort the slice to ensure that we have that we did the correct index. It's most probably not needed. I have found some info that it's helpful. So this should handle the sorting. And if we have it sorted, we can try to find the ID of our item, ID as an index inside this slice. Of course, it should return the item that's ID matches the one we put in a function input argument. And if our found ID is inside the range of our slice, and the given item found by ID matches what we wanted to achieve, then we can return its ID and the content. And if it's if we failed to find it, then we will return some negative ID that we are sure that won't be in that slice, and nil as there is no such item. Also, to try to remove an item from the list, we need its ID, as we as here we already will know that it exists. So we need to find the actual resource. We need to remove an entry from the slice. So we made a fresh slice from that from the current one, excluding the item that we want to remove. And also we need to remove from the map the content of such item, assuming that it also exists. Okay, so having that done, we can get through the implementation of the interface. with a set of functions defined there. We need a function that will just plainly return the type of the provider. Which for this case is constant of in-memory provider, and we need to implement the other functions that will map to our controller, and that will let us handle all we need considering the resource management. So let's start with that all of the paginated resources. And what should happen here is to that the full amount of what we have in our structure. We need to update the pagination object with that title to return it further. And we need to discover the boundaries of what we want to obtain as a result. And then if our request is not inside the boundaries, so we asked for more than we actually have in the list, then we will return an empty response object. And if we manage to get it correct and what we wanted actually exists, then we can return a part of slice that matches our boundaries, and that would make it ask for that all. What would be worth handling here is also making some filters that would get only the items that we are actually interested in, but we can handle it also on a client side if we prefer that kind of solution. Getting further, we need to handle that by ID item. And that would return either a resource or a null value if it doesn't exist. And if we manage to get a nil response, so if the resource is nil, then we will return nil and no such item response, or we will return a found resource and no error as an answer. Quite the same it will work for that content, except of we won't return the resource, but we will return an item from content by that past ID, and it's not nullable resource type obviously, but byte array which represent the content of the file. Then we have a function for updating uploading the resource content for given ID. It also needs an ID and byte content, and it returns the amount of modified rows and possible error. So if we don't manage to find an actual item that we might want to update, then we return 0, and in the other case, obviously we will set content for given ID and return 1 as one row was modified in this request. And we have 3 more functions, and we are good to go for this this part of work. For create, we obviously need to set a resource as input, and we will return the UID as the resource ID. Our UID is created by a wrapper that I have prepared for it. It's just it doesn't throw an error, but returns either the UID or null, and we need to assign it to our generated the parsed resource, and we will append our slice with that new entry. Then we can return UID and nil, as there is no error. Quite similar for the quite similarly simple for the update item. It needs also to have resource passed, but also it takes ID string, and it returns intent error if we do manage to find such item. We can update it. If not, we will throw 0 as no items modified. So else to make sure that we have that ID set, we will update it here. And all is left is delete. Which needs just an ID, which as above return some int and some error as an amount of those removed, and same as for update, we will try to find that entry that we want to delete. If we can find it, then as well we will just return 0 nil, and if we do, then we will remove that simple resource and return 1 and nil, and something is missing. It's if it's ID, and it is up and ready to go. I have probably missed some typing for upload content in service. Yes, I have missed one implementation here, so let's do it now. It would take a string and content as a byte array, and return a response. And not to waste more time, I will just copy the Redis solution for it. And now we should be able to build our application. And in the upcoming video, I will set up some tests to show you that it works in this form. So thank you for your attention for now.